Late at night, Dana was driving home from her long shift at the FBI field office. She was tired but calm, thinking about her day and how she was looking forward to some rest. Her car was not new, it was an older model with a few small problems, including a broken tail light that she had not yet fixed. The city streets were quiet, and there were not many cars around. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She sighed and pulled her car over to the side of the road. She already knew why she was being stopped. The broken tail light had caught the officer's attention. Dana rolled down her window, placing both hands clearly on the wheel, just as she had been trained to do. She knew all too well how quickly situations like this could go wrong. Even though she was an FBI agent, she had experienced moments when her identity and her hard work were doubted because of how she looked. Tonight felt like one of those moments waiting to happen. The officer walked quickly toward her car. His boots tapped hard against the pavement. His hand hovered dangerously close to his holster, as though he was already expecting trouble. Dana tried to stay calm. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to remain steady and patient. When the officer leaned down by her window, she greeted him politely. "Good evening, officer," she said softly. But instead of responding in a professional way, the officer barked out a command. "Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't move." His voice was sharp, filled with suspicion. He didn't even ask for her license and registration first, the way most officers did. His eyes were narrow and untrusting as he stared at her. Dana felt her heart race, but she didn't let her nerves show. "I understand, officer," she replied. "My hands are right here on the wheel." She tried to keep her tone respectful, hoping to calm the situation. Still, the officer seemed agitated. He leaned in closer, his face tense, and his voice louder. "What are you doing out here this late? Where are you coming from?" His questions carried more accusation than curiosity. Dana answered carefully. "I'm coming from work, sir. I'm just heading home." The officer didn't look convinced. He squinted at her, as if waiting for her to slip up. Then, without warning, his hand moved to his gun. In one quick motion, he pulled it out and pointed it straight at her chest. Dana froze. Time seemed to stop. Her training told her not to panic, but inside, she could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Don't move," the officer shouted again. Dana's mind raced. She had been in tense situations before, but it was different when the threat came from someone who was supposed to protect the public. Slowly and carefully, she spoke. "Officer, I'm reaching into my purse very slowly. I want to show you something important." Her voice was steady, calm, even though fear was building inside her. She moved one hand very gently, keeping her motion slow, and reached into her bag. She pulled out her FBI badge, holding it with both hands so there was no mistake. "Sir," she said clearly, "I am a federal agent. Here is my badge." Instead of reacting with respect or understanding, the officer burst into laughter. He tilted his head back and let out a mocking laugh. "This? You expect me to believe this?" he said, waving his gun as though the badge meant nothing. "You think you can just flash something you bought online and fool me?" Dana kept her face calm, but inside, she was disappointed. She had worked for years to earn that badge. She had trained harder than most, endured difficult assignments, and given her best to serve her country. And now, in this moment, it was being mocked. The officer shook his head, smirking as he kept his weapon aimed at her. "Lady, you better come up with a better story than that," he said. His laughter was cruel, as though he enjoyed the power he had over her. Dana did not argue. She knew better than to make the situation worse. Her badge might not have been respected in that moment, but she still had something else she could rely on. She had prepared for emergencies like this. Hidden on her keychain was a small emergency beacon, something only agents carried. With one subtle press, she could send a signal to the FBI dispatch. It was silent, quick, and invisible to the officer standing there. As she sat there, appearing calm, she let her thumb gently press the beacon. A signal went out instantly, alerting her colleagues that she was in distress. She kept her eyes on the officer, never breaking her calm expression, even though her pulse was racing. The street around them was still quiet, but Dana knew it wouldn't be for long. Help was on the way. She just needed to buy some time. The officer kept laughing, mocking her badge, and throwing out harsh words. An FBI agent? You. That's the funniest thing I've heard all week, he sneered. You better pray I don't take you in for lying to an officer. Dana didn't respond. She stayed silent, her eyes forward, her breathing controlled. She had been in high-pressure situations before, and she knew silence could sometimes speak louder than words. Minutes ticked by, though to Dana it felt much longer. The officer seemed to enjoy dragging out the moment, holding his power over her. What he didn't know was that everything was about to change. Somewhere nearby, agents were already racing toward her location. Dana's mind stayed sharp. She replayed her training in her head: remain calm, avoid sudden movements, don't escalate, wait for backup. She trusted that her colleagues would arrive soon. All she needed to do was hold steady, keep her composure, and avoid giving the officer any reason to act recklessly. Her fingers stayed locked on the wheel, the badge resting on the dashboard now, shining faintly under the streetlight. The symbol of her hard work and dedication was right there in front of him, yet he treated it like a joke. As she sat waiting, Dana thought about the irony of it all. She had worked her entire career to serve the public and bring justice, yet here she was, sitting quietly while a man in uniform pointed a gun at her, laughing at her identity. Still, she chose patience. She chose discipline. Because she knew the truth, in a matter of moments, the real power would shift. And when it did, the officer would regret ever doubting who she was. The night air was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady hum of Dana's car engine and the occasional hiss of tires from cars passing in the distance. The officer's shadow hovered over her, his gun still drawn, his mocking laughter ringing in her ears. For a moment, it felt surreal, almost like she was watching someone else go through it. But the cold barrel pointed at her chest reminded her it was real, dangerously real. She sat perfectly still, hands placed exactly where he had demanded, though inside she was counting the seconds. She had pressed her emergency beacon. She knew help was coming, but waiting for it felt like an eternity. The officer bent closer, squinting at her face as if he could read her thoughts. You think you're clever, don't you? He muttered. Flashing that shiny little badge like I'm supposed to bow down to you. Lady, I've been on this job for 10 years. I know a fake when I see one. His voice carried arrogance, but underneath, there was a faint tremor, as though he was trying to convince himself more than her. Dana remained calm. Officer, I assure you, my badge is real. I am with the Bureau. Please, if you'd like, you can radio in my credentials. Her tone was even, her words slow and deliberate. He smirked. Radio it in? Oh, that's cute. You think I'm wasting my time on your little story? No, ma'am. You're not going to trick me. He lifted the badge off her dashboard with 2 fingers, glanced at it briefly, and tossed it back carelessly. Looks too clean to be real. You probably bought it off the internet. The dismissal stung, but Dana did not let it show. Instead, she studied him. His hands trembled slightly as he held the gun, though his grin tried to mask it. She had seen men like him before, too eager to prove themselves, too quick to believe power made them untouchable. The difference was that this time, the arrogance was directed at her, and the irony was painful. As the seconds stretched, Dana's thoughts drifted to her training. Every agent was taught that in dangerous confrontations, the first rule was patience. Panic closed doors, patience opened them. She focused on her breathing, controlling her heartbeat, keeping her muscles relaxed. If she flinched or raised her voice, the situation could spiral. But if she stayed calm, she could survive these tense minutes until her colleagues arrived. The officer chuckled again, pacing a little by her car. You know what's funny? You don't even look like an agent. Where's the suit? Where's the fancy car? Shouldn't you be in something other than this old rust bucket? He tapped the hood of her car with the back of his hand, as though mocking not just her badge but her life. Dana felt heat rise in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She thought of all the nights she had stayed late at the office, the mornings she had gone into the field before sunrise, the long hours of sacrifice. Her worth wasn't in clothes or cars, it was in her work. Yet here was a man who couldn't see past appearances, who believed uniforms and shiny objects defined authority. I'm telling you the truth, she said softly. But you don't want to hear it right now. That's your choice. Her calmness seemed to irritate him more than anger would have. He pointed the gun a little closer, as if trying to shake her. Don't get smart with me. You sit there and do as I say. Understand? Yes, sir, she replied, her voice steady. Minutes passed. The night felt endless. But then, somewhere in the distance, Dana noticed faint headlights moving faster than usual. She knew it had to be them. The beacon had worked. Relief washed through her veins, though she kept her face neutral. She couldn't afford to let him notice her shift in energy. The officer, oblivious, leaned on her car. Let me guess, he sneered. You're gonna say your FBI friends are coming right now, huh? That they'll swoop in and save you. That's always the story, isn't it? Except no one's coming. He chuckled again, convinced he had all the power. Dana simply looked forward, silent. She didn't need to answer. His words were about to be proven wrong. The faint hum of engines grew louder. Two unmarked black SUVs appeared at the far end of the street. Their approach was quiet but swift, headlights sharp, movements precise. Dana's heart lifted slightly. She knew the people in those vehicles, her colleagues, her team. They didn't just come for calls, they came for her. But the officer hadn't noticed yet. He was too caught up in his own voice. You know, I could take you in right now for resisting. Make you spend the night in a cell. Teach you a lesson about lying to the wrong person. Dana stayed silent, but inside, she felt the tide turning. Within moments, the SUVs rolled closer. They stopped a few feet behind the officer's patrol car. Doors opened in unison, and figures in dark tactical vests stepped out, moving with the quiet confidence of professionals trained for moments exactly like this. It was then that the officer finally noticed the sudden lights behind him. He turned, frowning, his gun still in his hand. What the he started, but before he could finish, strong voices cut through the night. Federal agents. Drop your weapon now. The officer froze. His grin vanished, replaced by a look of shock. He turned back toward Dana, then at the group of agents, confusion flooding his face. For a second, he seemed unsure if this was real. His own words from earlier echoed back at him about fake badges, about no one coming, and now the truth stood right behind him, undeniable. Dana didn't move. She sat still, her badge still visible on the dashboard, her calm expression unbroken. The officer's hand shook as he held the gun. His arrogance faltered. Wait, hold on. This isn't what it looks like. She said she was an agent. I didn't believe her. His voice cracked with sudden nervousness. But the agents advancing toward him didn't pause. Their commands were sharp, unwavering. Drop the weapon. Now. Dana watched as the moment stretched thin. The same man who had mocked her, who had laughed in her face, was now trembling in disbelief. He had underestimated her, underestimated who she was. And in less than 2 minutes, his mistake was catching up with him. She thought of how quickly power could change hands. Just moments ago, she had been the one under his control, a gun pointed at her while he laughed. But now, the situation was reversed, and the truth of her identity had come crashing down on him with the weight of the entire bureau. Her colleagues moved closer, their eyes locked on the officer. Dana stayed still, steady, letting the scene unfold. She didn't need to say anything now. Her badge, her patience, and her team spoke louder than words ever could. The officer swallowed hard, glancing at the armed agents around him. His mockery was gone. In its place was fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes too late that they had made a mistake too big to erase. And as he finally lowered his weapon, Dana knew the balance had shifted. The game he thought he was playing had ended, and reality had arrived. The officer's gun slowly dipped as his eyes darted between Dana and the group of agents surrounding him. Just moments before, he had laughed at her badge, mocking her career, her dignity, and her truth. Now the very people he had doubted were stepping closer, their voices sharp and commanding. The shift in power was swift and undeniable, but for Dana, it felt like it had taken hours to reach this moment. She sat perfectly still, watching as the tide of the night began to turn. "Drop the weapon," the lead agent shouted again, his voice firm enough to cut through any hesitation. The officer's hands shook. For the first time since he pulled her over, the confidence in his eyes had vanished. He looked small, cornered, and confused, as though he couldn't believe his arrogance had led him here. Dana stayed calm, her body steady, her face unreadable. She had trained for moments like this, not just the physical part, but the emotional part too. The ability to sit still, to stay quiet, to let the truth unfold without needing to scream it. It was a discipline that few mastered, but tonight it was serving her well. The officer's voice cracked. "Wait, listen, I didn't know. She said she was an agent, but I didn't believe her." I thought his excuses stumbled over themselves. The agents didn't lower their weapons. "Put the gun on the ground," another agent barked. "Do it now." The officer hesitated, his pride battling with fear. Slowly, he crouched and set the gun on the asphalt. The sound of metal hitting pavement echoed in the night, sharp and final. One of the agents stepped forward quickly, kicking the weapon away. Another grabbed the officer's wrist, pulling him back roughly, securing him before he could make another move. In seconds, the man who had just mocked Dana stood in handcuffs, his arms locked behind his back, his face pale under the flashing red and blue lights of his own patrol car. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been sitting helpless under the aim of his gun, and now he stood helpless under the control of her team. Neighbors had begun to peek from behind curtains, some even stepping onto porches to watch. The quiet street had transformed into a stage where power, arrogance, and truth played out in real time. People whispered to each other, eyes wide at the sight of an officer being taken down by federal agents. Dana finally opened her door, stepping out with grace. She adjusted her jacket, picked up her badge from the dashboard, and held it in her hand as she walked toward her colleagues. Her steps were slow and steady, each one reclaiming the dignity the officer had tried to strip away. "You handled it perfectly," the lead agent told her softly as she approached. His eyes carried both pride and concern. "We got your signal. You stayed calm under pressure. That's what saved you." Dana nodded, though she said little. Words weren't needed at that moment. Her silence was powerful enough. Meanwhile, the officer began to speak again, his tone desperate now. "Come on, this is a mistake. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to do my job." His voice cracked as he struggled against the cuffs. "You can't do this to me. I'm one of you." One of the agents gave him a cold glance. You pointed a weapon at a federal agent, ignored her badge, and mocked her. You made choices, and now you'll face the consequences. Dana watched quietly as the man lowered his head. His arrogance had drained away, leaving only shame. She could see it in his posture, in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his eyes darted to the ground instead of meeting anyone's gaze. Her mind drifted back to those tense moments in the car, the feeling of his gun pointed at her, the sting of his laughter, the weight of waiting. The memory was fresh, but she also felt a strange sense of closure. He had tried to diminish her, to turn her identity into a joke. But now the truth stood in front of everyone, undeniable. The lead agent turned to Dana. "Do you want to ride back with us, or do you want to drive home?" "I'll drive," she said softly. "I want to finish what I started." Her words carried a quiet strength. She had begun the night as a target, mocked and doubted, but she would end it on her own terms, behind the wheel of her own car, with her dignity intact. As the agents escorted the officer toward their vehicle, Dana looked around at the scene. The flashing lights painted the neighborhood in shades of red and blue, the air filled with whispers from onlookers. She could almost feel the weight of their thoughts, the shock of seeing an officer in cuffs, the questions they would ask themselves later, the quiet reminder that no one was above accountability. She slid back into her car, resting her badge on the passenger seat. For a moment, she let herself breathe deeply, releasing the tension she had held for so long. Her hands trembled slightly now that the danger had passed, but she gripped the steering wheel firmly. She would not let that moment define her fear. She would let it define her strength. As she watched her colleagues drive away with the arrested officer, Dana reflected on the fragile balance of power. Just 2 minutes had changed everything. 2 minutes from being mocked to being vindicated, from being threatened to watching the threat be taken away in handcuffs. She knew the story would spread, first among her colleagues, then across the department, maybe even further. It would serve as a reminder: appearances can deceive, arrogance can blind, but truth always comes forward. The night sky stretched quietly above her, the chaos fading with each passing second. Dana started her car and pulled onto the road again, her mind steady, her heart strong. She knew tomorrow would bring questions, reports, and maybe even headlines. But tonight, all she wanted was peace, the peace of knowing she had endured, she had waited, and she had let the truth reveal itself in the most powerful way. And as she drove home, she carried with her not just the weight of what had happened, but also the quiet victory of patience, dignity, and justice finding its way in the end. The night had taken on a strange quiet after the chaos. The officer stood cuffed by his own patrol car, his once confident posture broken into slumped shoulders and downcast eyes. Just minutes before, he had laughed boldly at Dana, mocking her badge and questioning her identity. Now, his laughter was gone, replaced with the silence of defeat. The flashing lights from his cruiser painted the street red and blue, bouncing off windows and street signs, creating an almost surreal scene. Dana remained composed, though inside her chest her heart was still calming from the storm. She had been trained for tense situations, but it was different when the danger was turned toward her in such a personal way. She had held her breath under the barrel of a gun, kept her voice calm under mocking laughter, and now here she stood, watching justice turn around so quickly. The lead FBI agent, a tall man named Reynolds, stepped closer to her. "You handled yourself with incredible control," he said softly. "Most people would have panicked, but you stayed calm. That's why you're here safe, Dana." She nodded, though her expression stayed neutral. "I did what I had to do," she replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the weight of the experience. The officer, now in cuffs, shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, you don't have to do this," he muttered. "I didn't know. I thought she was lying." His excuses sounded weaker with every word. He looked around at the agents surrounding him, his earlier arrogance gone. He seemed small now, trapped in the consequences of his own choices. One of the agents guarding him responded sharply. "You pointed a gun at a federal agent and laughed at her credentials. That's not something you can explain away. You knew what you were doing." The officer lowered his head, his words drying up in the heavy silence that followed. The neighborhood was awake now, lights on, curtains parted, people standing quietly on porches. They whispered among themselves, stunned at the sight of a police officer in handcuffs, arrested not by strangers but by fellow law enforcement. Dana could feel their eyes on her, though she didn't turn to look. She understood what they were witnessing, a moment where truth and arrogance collided, and arrogance lost. For some, it would be a shock. For others, maybe a lesson. For her, it was simply the truth shining through after being dismissed. Agent Reynolds gave the signal, and two agents began to escort the officer toward one of the black SUVs. His steps were stiff, almost reluctant, as though he hoped something would change. But nothing would. His mocking laughter had turned to silence, his authority had turned to handcuffs, and the very badge he had dismissed now stood as the reason for his downfall. As he was placed inside the vehicle, Dana felt the air grow lighter. The tension that had wrapped around her chest for so long finally loosened. She walked toward her colleagues, her badge still firm in her hand, gleaming under the streetlights. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a small exhale of relief. "You should get checked out," Reynolds said kindly. "Something like this can rattle anyone." Dana shook her head gently. "I'm fine." Shaken, but fine. She glanced at the SUV where the officer now Saturday he'll have to answer for tonight. "That's what matters." The agents nodded, respecting her strength. They knew what she had endured in those long minutes before they arrived. They had seen the courage it took to stay calm, to trust the signal, to wait without panic. The street began to clear as the SUVs prepared to leave. The officer's cruiser was left behind, its lights still flashing, almost mocking its owner. It was a strange sight, a symbol of authority now standing empty, while its driver sat restrained inside another vehicle. Before leaving, Reynolds turned to Dana again. "Do you want us to escort you home?" She shook her head. "No. I'll drive myself. I need to finish this night on my own terms." Her words were quiet but firm. He respected her decision. "All right. But if you need anything, you call." Dana nodded in gratitude. She climbed back into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She stared for a moment at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes looked tired, but also determined. She had faced the worst of doubt, the sting of being laughed at, and the terror of a gun pointed at her chest. Yet she had endured. Her badge sat on the seat beside her. She glanced at it and thought about how easily it had been dismissed, how quickly someone had tried to strip it of meaning. But its value was not in the eyes of mockers, it was in the years of dedication, the sacrifices, the service. Nothing could erase that truth. She started the engine. The soft rumble filled the silence, steady and grounding. As she pulled onto the street, she looked once more at the SUVs ahead of her, carrying the officer away. The night had begun with flashing lights that put her in danger, and it ended with flashing lights that secured her safety. Her thoughts drifted to what would come next: reports, investigations, questions. She knew the story would spread quickly, whispered in halls, passed along in conversations. Some would focus on the officer's arrogance, others on the shocking reversal, but she knew the real story was patience. The strength to wait, to trust, to hold steady until truth revealed itself. As the city lights guided her way home, Dana allowed herself a small smile. Not one of joy, but of quiet victory. She had faced mockery with grace, danger with patience, and now, she was driving forward stronger than before. Behind her, the neighborhood slowly settled back into quiet. But for those who had seen it, the memory of that night would linger. The image of a laughing officer silenced by his own mistake, the dignity of a woman who never lost her calm. These would not be forgotten easily. Dana drove on, the road unfolding before her. The night was still, but her spirit was alive with the reminder: dignity cannot be mocked away, truth cannot be silenced, and patience, even in the darkest moments, carries its own powerful light. The ride home was quiet, but Dana's mind was anything but still. The street lights glowed softly as she drove, their beams stretching across the pavement like reminders of the long road she had traveled, not just tonight but in her entire journey as an FBI agent. Her hands rested firmly on the steering wheel, though every so often, her eyes flicked to the badge lying on the passenger seat. That small piece of metal had been ridiculed, laughed at, and dismissed as fake just an hour ago. Yet it was the very reason she was alive, the very reason her truth had prevailed. She thought about the moments in the car when the officer had left. The sound of it still echoed faintly in her mind, sharp, mocking, careless. But now, instead of making her angry, it made her reflective. What drove a man to laugh at something so serious? Was it arrogance, prejudice, or simply the false comfort of authority? Whatever it was, it had cost him dearly. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She glanced down briefly when she stopped at a red light. A message from her colleague, Agent Reynolds, lit up the screen: "He's being booked now. Don't worry. You did everything right." Dana smiled faintly at the message. She appreciated the reassurance, but deep down, she already knew she had done the right thing. Every decision she made, keeping her hands steady, speaking calmly, activating the beacon, had been part of her training, but it had also been part of her character. Staying composed when others tried to strip away her dignity was not just a skill, it was a strength she had carried all her life. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house looked peaceful. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet. The night's events rushed back all at once: the gun pointed at her chest, the laughter, the arrival of the SUVs, the sight of the officer in handcuffs. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the weight of it settle in her chest. It was over now. But the lesson of it would stay with her forever. Inside, the warmth of home greeted her. She set her badge carefully on the kitchen table, letting it shine under the soft light. To anyone else, it might just look like a badge, but to her, it was a story, one of struggle, sacrifice, and strength. Tonight had tested its meaning in the harshest way, and yet it stood as proof that her years of work could not be erased by a laugh or a gun. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down, letting the cool drink calm her nerves. Slowly, her body began to relax, though her mind continued to replay the night. She thought about the officer's face as the agents surrounded him. The way his confidence had melted into fear. The way his arrogance had collapsed under the truth. That image, she knew, would remain etched in her memory for a long time. Later, as she prepared for bed, Dana reflected on what the incident meant, not just for her but for anyone who had ever been underestimated. She had been judged by her appearance, by her car, by the officer's assumptions. He never paused to consider her words or her credentials. He only saw what he wanted to see. But truth does not change because someone refuses to see it. Truth stands firm, waiting for its moment to be revealed. The next morning, news spread quickly. Though no cameras had been present, whispers traveled fast in the law enforcement world. People talked about the officer who had mocked an FBI badge and ended the night in handcuffs. Some were shocked. Some were not surprised at all. Many called Dana quietly, sending messages of support, respect, and admiration. "You kept your head high," one colleague said. "That's what we all admire about you." She appreciated the kind words, but she did not bask in them. For Dana, it wasn't about being praised, it was about the lesson of patience and dignity. She wanted people to see that losing your calm in the face of arrogance never wins the battle. Waiting, trusting the truth, and letting actions speak louder than arguments, that was the true victory. The officer, meanwhile, faced his own reality. For years, he had carried his badge like a shield of authority, but in 2 minutes, it had been stripped away by his own choices. He had mocked someone whose work and sacrifice went far deeper than his imagination could grasp. Now he sat in a cell, replaying the night from his perspective, realizing too late that arrogance had blinded him to truth. For Dana, the days that followed brought paperwork, meetings, and formal reports. Each time she retold the story, she spoke in the same calm, steady voice she had used that night. She left out the bitterness, choosing instead to focus on the facts. But those who listened felt the power of her restraint, the quiet strength of a woman who had faced danger with dignity. At home, she allowed herself moments of reflection. She thought of the neighbors who had watched from their porches, whispering to each other as they saw the scene unfold. She wondered what they had felt when they saw the reversal when the man who laughed ended up in cuffs. Perhaps some of them had felt disbelief. Perhaps others had felt relief, knowing that arrogance does not always win. One evening, as she sat by her window, Dana thought of her younger self, the girl who once dreamed of making a difference, who had pushed through challenges, who had carried herself with quiet determination. That younger self would have been proud of tonight. Not because of the humiliation of the officer, but because of her own ability to remain strong. Her badge was more than metal. It was a story of persistence, and that night had added another chapter. She had proven, not only to the officer but also to herself, that she could endure disrespect without losing dignity. That she could face danger without losing composure. And that truth, no matter how mocked, would always rise to the surface. As days turned into weeks, the incident became less of a daily topic, but its impact lingered. Some saw it as a scandal, others as justice. But for Dana, it was a reminder of the life she had chosen, a life where patience, discipline, and courage mattered more than appearances. One night, as she drove home again past the same street where it had all happened, she slowed down for a moment. The place looked ordinary, quiet, like nothing had ever happened. But she knew better. She knew that corner had been a stage where arrogance fell and truth stood tall. She smiled faintly to herself and kept driving, the road ahead lit by the steady glow of the streetlights. The story of that night would live on, whispered in police departments, retold in training sessions, remembered by neighbors. And through it all, Dana's calm, steady presence would be the heart of the lesson: respect cannot be mocked away, dignity cannot be stolen, and truth always arrives, sometimes in silence, sometimes in sirens, but always with strength. And as she continued her journey in life and in work, she carried that night with her, not as a wound, but as proof that even in the face of laughter and doubt, patience and dignity can turn the world around in just 2 minutes.